Selected parts from the book One Life is Not Enough, written by Shri K. Natwar Singh. Part 30. A few months later, a group of students from St. Stephen's College, accompanied by the principal and two teachers, one of whom was Professor E.R. Kapadia, visited Pakistan. I requested the president to spare a few minutes to receive the team from St. Stephen's College. His response was overwhelming. At the Wagah border, the president spoke to Professor Kapadia over telephone. The professor was quite overcome. I accompanied the Stephanians to the dinner hosted for them by the president. The young students were extremely excited, as was Principal Rajpal. While I had expected a small informal dinner, when we arrived at State House, we were conducted to a large drawing room. Apart from the president, those present included three cabinet ministers and four chancellors, among others. Even I was surprised. The boys, of course, were awestruck. Principal Rajpal brought out an old photograph taken in 1944 in which Zia ul Haq was also present. Accepting the photograph, the president touched it to his forehead and said that he would treasure it. He did not have a copy of the photograph because he could not afford to buy one in his college days. During dinner, he asked Principal Rajpal which places he and his students were proposing to visit in Pakistan. He was told that they were going to Mohenjo-daro and Karachi city by train. The president offered to fly them in his personal plane instead. The entire team was thrilled. Once they returned to their hotel, they found yet another surprise in store. In each room, gifts had been placed, some of them rather expensive. The professors were given a carpet each. Had a group of Pakistani students visited India, they would not have been received even by a minister of state, let alone the president. 1981 was also the centenary year of St. Stephen's College. President Zia was keen to come to India and attend the centenary celebrations, but Indira Gandhi had her reservations. So, instead, I asked the president if he was willing to write an article for the centenary issue of the college magazine, The Stephanian. He did so, and I presented him with a copy of the magazine for his perusal. While reading the magazine, he came across an article by Augustine Paul, who used to be his roommate while he was studying at St. Stephen's. The president asked me to find out Paul's whereabouts so that he could write to Paul and send his autographed photograph along with the letter. With some difficulty, I managed to trace Paul. He was working with the Indian Embassy in Bangkok. The president wrote to him but did not receive a reply even after 6 or 7 weeks. He asked me to inquire. I did so, and like a good civil servant, Paul reported that he had indeed received the letter and photograph. That changed his life. Since the news got out, the Indian Intelligence Bureau hounded him regarding his connection to the Pakistan president. They made his life hell. It finally took my intervention to get Paul off the hook. All for a friendship forged at college. This shows how fragile India Pakistan relations were at the time. Soon after I was posted to Pakistan, I discovered that the Indian embassy in Islamabad had no contact with the Bhutto family. During Morarji Desai's regime, our ambassador in Pakistan, the able and affable Shankar Bajpai, had been instructed to keep away from the Bhutto family. This I found extraordinary. During my next visit to New Delhi in June, an opportunity presented itself when Nasrat Bhutto sent a condolence message to Indira Gandhi on the death of her son Sanjay Gandhi. I sought Mrs. Gandhi's permission to get in touch with Begum Nasrat Bhutto. She immediately agreed. The Bhutto family lived in Karachi. Mrs. Bhutto was confined to her house on Clifton Road, which was always surrounded by the Pakistani army and intelligence agents. The Consul General Manishankar Iyer could not help because he, too, was forbidden to have anything to do with Mrs. Bhutto. S.K. Lamba, my energetic and well informed deputy, was discreetly in touch with a small number of non establishment Pakistanis, among them Dr. Niaji, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's dentist. He was also a member of the Pakistan People's Party and had been jailed several times. I fixed an appointment with Dr. Niaji under the pretext of having my tooth checked. When I got to his clinic, I told him that I wanted his help in getting in touch with Mrs. Bhutto. Dr. Niaji himself was under surveillance. He told me that it would not be easy, but he would try his best to arrange a meeting. After several weeks, he informed me that Mrs. Bhutto would be glad to see me at her house in Karachi on 21st August. Within a few days, I flew to Karachi. Accompanied by Consul General Manishankar Iyer, I drove to Mrs. Bhutto's house in Clifton Road. It was one of the most painful encounters of my diplomatic life. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His father, Sir Shahnawaz Bhutto, was a man of some consequence. Bhutto was educated at Stanford University and Oxford. An accomplished diplomat, he successfully cultivated China at our expense, and in July 1972, he got the better of Indira Gandhi during the Shimla Agreement negotiations. She let him off the hook on P.N. Huskar's advice. He was taking a long view of Indo-Pak relations. Bhutto could not survive a day if he returned empty-handed. An unstable Pakistan was not in India's interests. The cabinet ministers Swaran Singh, Y.B. Chavan and Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad kept silent. Haskar carried the day. The Shimla Agreement, signed on July 2nd, 1972, continues to haunt us. Zia ul Haq was Bhutto's protege. When the post of the Chief of the Army Staff fell vacant, Bhutto superseded several generals senior to Zia to give him the post. Bhutto assumed that a mild and submissive officer like Zia ul Haq would not cause him any trouble and paid with his life for reposing his trust in the man. The house had a gloomy air about it. I found Mrs. Bhutto with her younger daughter Sanam. Her elder daughter Benazir Bhutto was then in prison in Larkana. When I thanked her for receiving me, she said that she was not sure that I would turn up as she had received confusing signals. I assured her that nothing would have prevented me from meeting her because I had brought a letter from Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. In Bhutto's time, the house would have been full of activity. Now it looked like a well kept graveyard. It was quite obvious that Mrs. Bhutto was suffering from severe depression. Not only did she have no contact with Benazir, she could not meet anyone else either. As a well wisher, I asked her to recount the true circumstances under which her husband had been hanged. According to Mrs. Bhutto, her husband had been killed several hours before he was hanged. The jail superintendent had informed them that the hanging would take place at 4:30 a.m. and had allowed the family 1 hour between 8 and 9 p.m. the previous night for one final meeting. Then the time of his hanging was changed to 2 a.m. A senior general of the Pakistani army, accompanied by one or two other officers, had come to Bhutto's cell an hour before his hanging and asked him to sign a document which would exonerate the Pakistani army for their actions in East Pakistan. Bhutto caught the general by the collar. A scuffle followed, during which Bhutto fell and cracked his skull. The Pakistani army, according to Mrs. Bhutto, hanged a man who was already dead. As soon as I returned to the hotel, I received a telephone call from President Zia ul Haq asking me how I was and how was I spending my time in Karachi. This was to tell me that he knew what I had been up to. My next lengthy meeting with Mrs. Bhutto took place at her home in Karachi in the winter of 1981. Mrs. Bhutto was all alone then, quite unwell and coughing up some blood. The Pakistan government would not allow her to go abroad for treatment, and no one in Pakistan was willing to plead her case with the president. I suggested that she could get the government to depute half a dozen senior doctors to examine her and submit a report to the president. If the report confirmed that she must be sent abroad for treatment, Mrs. Gandhi could make a public appeal to President Zia-ul-Haq purely on humanitarian grounds. A few days later, as per my advice, a panel of eminent doctors examined Mrs. Bhutto and declared that she needed immediate treatment abroad. I sent a message to Mrs. Gandhi and was asked to come to Delhi to brief her. She decided to write to the President of Pakistan to allow Mrs. Bhutto to go abroad for treatment purely on humanitarian grounds. I was to personally deliver the letter to the President. When I gave the letter to President Zia-ul-Haq, he was not amused and considered our plea on behalf of Mrs. Bhutto interference in the internal affairs of his country. I respectfully said to him that Mrs. Gandhi had made her appeal after mature consideration and no politics was involved. It was, of course, up to the President to turn down her appeal. This I knew he could not do. Having hanged Bhutto, the last thing he wanted was the death of his widow on his hands. Mrs. Bhutto left for London to be medically treated and Benazir became the leader of the Pakistan People's Party in her place. Several times I mentioned to the President that our two countries would profit if the trade route from India to Islamabad was kept open. The goods that Pakistan was getting from America and Japan were available in India at a much lower price, and that would also favorably impinge on the political situation. But the business lobby and the all powerful army were against it. A few months before my departure from Pakistan, the Secretary General gave me a document which contained the offer of an Indo-Pak no-war pact. No mention of it had been made 3 months earlier when P.V. Narasimha Rao was in Pakistan. The timing, I later discovered, was to impress the American Congress, which was about to vote on aid for Pakistan. Unfortunately, we in India did not respond to the Pakistan offer for nearly 2 months. This was doing us no good. The impression going around was that we were dragging our feet. Finally, the Foreign Secretary R.B. Sathe and I succeeded in persuading the Prime Minister to respond. P.V. Narasimha Rao was in no hurry. He was stuck on the 1949 offer of a no-war pact by India. I told him not to insist because that offer included arbitration and determining the vision of the people of Kashmir. Eventually, India offered a treaty of friendship. By the time I left Islamabad on 1st May, we had not received Pakistan's reply. I am an ardent supporter for India and Pakistan to have close, cordial, and good neighborly relations. The main hurdle is the Kashmir issue. If one goes to South India, this issue is seldom mentioned. In Pakistan, wherever one may go, the Kashmir issue is always raised. Having been intimately connected with this matter for many decades, I do believe that no government in India and no government in Pakistan would agree to concede an inch of territory. Any government doing so would fall the next day. The Pakistan Army and the ISI would never allow any Pakistan president or Prime Minister to make any concession on Kashmir. I want history to judge me objectively. Pakistan President General Zia-ul Haq on August 13 in his last interview. 4 days after he expressed this wish, Zia, the politician and the dictator, the soldier and the diplomat, the Islamic true believer and the tyrant, was interred in the tumultuous history of the subcontinent. I want history to judge me objectively, said Pakistan President General Zia-ul Haq on August 13, 1987, in his last interview. 4 days after he expressed this wish, Zia, the politician and the dictator, the soldier and the diplomat, the Islamic true believer and the tyrant, was interred in the tumultuous history of the subcontinent. As the Lockheed C-130 Hercules, flying him back from an army demonstration, exploded into a ball of fire over a barren expanse of land near the desert city of Bahawalpur. Yet another era had come to a violent end. Lying in the wreckage were, along with US Ambassador Arnold Raphael and 5 other generals, the remains of the man who had so strongly presided over the destiny of his nation for 11 years. Here was a tyrannical dictator with pretensions to statesmanship who usurped power by arresting and finally killing the very person who had made him the chief of army staff over the heads of half a dozen seniors. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had made the mistake of believing Zia's many oaths and promises of eternal loyalty. He paid with his life. Zia snuffed out what remained of the challenge by jailing his ailing widow and young daughter and exiling his sons. His chapter came to a violent end. Thank you very much. While I had expected a small informal dinner, when we arrived at the State House, we were conducted to a large drawing room. Conduct means organize and carry out. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His father, Sir Shah Nawaz Bhutto, was a man of some consequence. Man of some consequence means important or valuable. Zia-ul Haq was Bhutto's protege. Protege. Protege means a young person who is helped and guided by an older and influential person. The goods that Pakistan was getting from America and Japan were available in India at much lower prices, and that would also favorably impinge on the political situation. Impinge means to have an effect on something. I want history to judge me objectively. Objectively means impartially. 4 days after he expressed this wish, Zia, the politician and the dictator, the soldier and the diplomat, the Islamic true believer and the tyrant, was interred in the tumultuous history of the subcontinent. Inter, I-N-T-E-R, inter means bury. Thank you very much.